we will be continuing with another part of warehousing, which is cargo bikes, but also storage of cargo bikes. With all of these clean air zones, micro hubs, and so on, cargo bikes are becoming most likely the best mode for delivering and operating. But where do you store it, and how do you make sure that everything is fine? And this will be in just around 15 seconds. Supply chain crises are everywhere, but knowledge can help you. Join the Logistics Point, a digital news platform for logistics and supply chain. Subscribe now on YouTube to access free online events, interviews with leading supply chain experts, and more. The Logistics Point. Now, as I mentioned, I'm adding Max Wilson and also Charlie Ford. Now, Max is from SpokeSafe and Charlie is from Hatat Solutions. And we're going to talk about, as I mentioned, cargo bikes, but also cargo bikes maintenance, storage, and some very important rules around the storage. Max, Charlie, thank you very much for joining us.
Hi, how are you?
Yeah, fine, thank you. Charlie?
Morning.
I mentioned cargo bikes, and is it true that what I said, that it's going to be the preferred way of delivering and fulfilling orders in cities at the moment? Max?
I mean, I've got a vested interest to say yes, so I'm going to bang my drum there and say absolutely. I mean, look, it's all really nascent. Everything's really new. There was lots of talk of regulation earlier, and then there was lots of talk of like the difficulties of actually physically finding space to do these micro fulfillment centers. I think fundamentally everyone's trying to address the same problem, which is people want things faster. It's economically really difficult to do that. It's logistically very technically difficult to do that, and quite often we don't have the space to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of things that need to be solved in order to get your delivery 15, 20 minutes, 2 hours faster than it needs to be, or than it currently is done. So I think cargo bikes definitely have a role to play there. If the regulation pans out like it is seemingly doing so, then I think they probably will become ever more dominant. I mean, Charlie, there's been lots of stuff this week about, or over the past few weeks, about smaller cargo bike logistics companies getting gobbled up by some of the bigger players. There's lots of cargo bike sustainable delivery startups coming out that are raising quite a lot of money from VCs. So you can follow the money. If money's being put into play, then there's probably a shout that someone smarter than me thinks it's a viable thing long term. But Charlie's better on that one than I am.
Yes, Charlie. Yeah, sorry, go on.
I was going to say, from the presentation we had earlier about clean air zones, I think there's lots of kind of headwinds pushing towards making it actually difficult for large vans, even electric vans in city centres. I mean, take the UK for example. The road network was built hundreds of years ago, and even city centres. So it doesn't matter. Physically, it's be very difficult to even get electric vans because you've got traffic lights and to make those deliveries possible. So the more people live in the city, the density increases, higher demands, goods and services, clean air zones, restricted traffic flows, more pedestrian access, just making it harder and harder to actually get goods into the city centre. And so cargo bikes and also e-bikes will be a great solution to that, being speed limited, being narrow width, and able to drive through pedestrian areas. It's really kind of pushing towards them being as actually a really important, viable solution to this last mile.
But one point which is also related to today's topic, which is the warehousing bit. How do warehouses change for cargo bikes? They have had to change quite a lot for electric vehicles and are changing for electric vehicles, but most of these cargo bikes are also to a degree electric. How has the storage facility, the warehousing facility changed? Maybe, sorry.
I was going to, I'll pass over to Max in a minute, but kind of my experience with cargo bike storage solutions, they are quite large, so they need dedicated storage spaces. Lots of companies are looking to find kind of micro storage locations, talking about this kind of micro hub within city centres, because cargo bikes can also are speed limited, so it doesn't make sense to use your existing warehouse on the outside of a city. You need a small depot or micro warehouse in the city centre to be able to deliver more efficiently, to do cross docking, move your goods to this micro depot, base your cargo bikes there and riders, and then they run kind of 2, 3, 5 mile radius around that area, delivering much more efficiently than you would with a van, for example. There's quite a few companies looking at it. I know that Max from SpokeSafe can talk a bit more about that. I think repurposing existing infrastructure is pretty important. So repurposing car parks for cargo bike storage is one area that people are looking into.
Max?
Yeah, I mean, I think what Parsley was saying about the repurposing of space is really interesting. I think the reality is, I come from like a real estate background, so I look at things from like a very, very real estate economic perspective. And in an ideal world, we would just convert, if you're a logistics operator, all of this supposedly redundant space in these big city centers to logistics hubs and fulfillment centers. But the reality is, there are far higher value uses in city centers than logistics spaces, and that's why the spaces are decreasing. And like long-term car parks will probably go to logistics uses, certainly, but actually probably a lot of them will also go to residential use. They'll be torn down entirely and built on tower blocks because we need more housing more than we need 15-minute grocery delivery. That's the reality of the situation, and the values are higher. But that's not to say that there isn't an opportunity to convert some of the redundant space. I just think it's going to be increasingly costly to do so because the economics they just tend to another way. I think technology can certainly help. I mean, one of the things that we're focused on is how do we sort of like cohabit these operators into defined spaces, so you haven't got 5, 6, 10 operators competing for the same space or taking more space than they need to because that's all that's available. Can you make these spaces run more efficiently and make them multi-use through technology? I think there's something there. It's interesting when you look at the actual like space planning of the units. You think, cargo bikes is going to be phenomenally space efficient and like you can get thousands of them into like a quite small space. And the reality is, it's not like that at all. They do actually require a decent amount of space. I mean, some of the cargo bikes, depending on which ones you're looking at, are not a million miles off of a small van in terms of sizing. When you look at the turning radiuses and stuff like that, they still do require space. So I think it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out probably over the next 3 years. There's a lot of companies that are being set up specifically to tackle this issue. You've got Fidium, who are effectively launching micro hubs across the country. They've got a partnership with a company that's actually physically buying car park assets, like actually buying the freeholds of them. That solves the economic question. You've got companies that are looking at repurposing what were once larger sort of urban industrial estates to micro mobility or micro fulfillment centers. So there's a lot of money going into it, and I think there's a lot of people scratching their heads trying to figure out how it's going to work. Ultimately, I think maybe as a consumer, we probably actually end up having to pay a little bit more for the deliveries that we're doing, because if you actually want it to work for the companies, you're going to have to probably pay a little bit more.
One thing I wanted to bring here is the word maintenance, not just of the cargo bikes and the know-how, but the other thing is in one of our first conversations, we also mentioned batteries, and how there needs to be a specific regulation for batteries. But first, for Charlie, how hard is it to maintain a cargo bike, and what knowledge do we need to have to do it?
So cargo bikes are kind of, like as I said, nascent. It's their new vehicle types, designed by almost all cargo bikes are from like less than 10 years old, as in terms of design of that bike. They are based on a bicycle, hence why cargo bike is in the name, but they do require specialist maintenance. And as an operator, you have two choices. Either you have in-house staff that do your own maintenance, train them up on the specific cargo bikes you have, or you outsource it to a specialist partner. And there's more and more specialist partners growing who do fleet maintenance. So for businesses, they come to you and they carry out on-site fleet maintenance. Feta would be an example of one of those companies based in London. And so I think, maintenance is super important. It's one of the things when buying or sourcing a cargo bike, you need the maintenance, otherwise it's not going to work. So you need the maintenance, you need the storage, you need the rider training, you need the spare batteries and safe storage of them. All of those things together are essential in order to make your cargo bike operation work.
And Max, I wanted to look with you on the word of batteries, which is a problem. How can it be solved?
Yeah, and the battery thing is both a problem and just frustrating in the fact that it's perceived to be a problem. So most of the stuff that you hear when it's like battery fires or issues of it is actually not really cargo bikes. Quite often what they are is like e-scooters that have been illegally modified, or things like tuk-tuks that have been, mass stored. There was a big fire close to London Bridge Station. I was actually around the area when it was happening, and like the whole area was covered in smoke. And it got, the media dove in on it as this an e-bike battery fire, but actually it was a rickshaw. It was a bunch of rickshaws with illegal batteries that had been hacked together and charged in a really unsafe infrastructure, and that's what caused the issue. So if you look at like the batteries that are actual like come from the manufacturers, aren't hacked together, aren't like retrofitted and bought from a dodgy supplier, actually it's really not that big of an issue, but it's difficult to sometimes differentiate, like how do you monitor which batteries are not being charged? And that's the difficulty. It's a problem that we're still solving at SpokeSafe. We've got a battery charging policy, and before we let anybody charge, they basically go through a questionnaire, a type form questionnaire. They submit photos of it, and if we deem the battery to be of a certain quality, then they can charge, and if not, then unfortunately you can't charge. So it's not as big an issue as like the press would lead you to believe it is, but it is an issue, and it's not one that's easily solved, because it's one thing checking people's batteries online and checking the information that they submit. It's another thing regulating it on site and making sure that people are behaving properly and not overloading certain facilities. So there are other ways to get around that as well. There are specific fire cabinets that you can be built where you can just charge all the batteries in one go. So if something does happen, it's sort of self-contained. We haven't, knock on wood, had any issues with it, and we've got lots of people that charge cargo bikes and delivery bikes and all that sort of stuff with us. It's not been an issue. But it is, again, it's just one of those things that needs to be figured out over time.
And for both of you, in a way, to sum up, how do you think cargo bikes will go into the future? Would there be even more market penetration? Have we reached the top? What is going to happen, Charlie?
I think it's still very early. There's lots of interest in the space, people talking about it. I think because it's quite a big change in a new vehicle type, it's going to take a little while for many incumbents to move in that way. But as Max mentioned earlier, seeing the news of DPD buying Absolutely, particularly like London Last Mile Courier, who do have a large fleet of cargo bikes, proving that these large carriers are trying to own their full end-to-end delivery, and using cargo bikes in the last mile. Amazon being a great example, who are spearheading the cargo bike operation across the UK. So I think it's one of those things that lots of carriers out there will probably be looking at it and thinking, well, it's complicated, but then if you also think the largest players are pushing in that space, what do they know that the small players don't? So I think there will be more and more cargo bikes in play. I think just the access to them and the funding and the know-how is it's not that easy, and it's not as easy to switch to a cargo bike as it is to buy a van and carry on driving it with an existing driving license. But I also think that because there's lots of factors pushing towards micro fulfillment and in low emission zones into centres and more pedestrianisation, the companies that do move towards cargo bikes now will be ahead of the game of their competitors in 5 years' time. I think that the earlier they do it, and I think cargo bikes, people might, their form factor will actually change over the coming years. At the moment, you pedal assist But actually, and also people might not realize they've never ridden a cargo bike before, but it's you actually don't really feel the effort of pedaling at all, because it's full electric assist. You're basically just moving your legs to make the motor kick in, and so it's not. And then the pedals will probably not exist in 10 years' time, and they will be micro mini e-vans in effect, on a kind of cargo bike format, probably in 10, 15, 20 years' time. So again, it's like, if you move towards these form factors now, it's gonna help your businesses in the last mile over the coming years, and to stay ahead of the competition.
And Max, how about you? What is your prediction?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Charlie. I think we're quite early. I think if you look at like cycling, just like commuter cycling in the UK, or you look at it in London, and modal share for bikes is like 3% or something like that. So 3% of all trips in London are done by bike. That's actually extremely low. Like if you look at it in the European cities, it's as high as 25 and 30% If you go around at commuting time, you'll see thousands of people on bikes. So it's very visible, but you think that's still 8 times smaller than it ought to be. I think if you have more and more people cycling, less people on the roads, it probably makes sense that the delivery factor follows that. So I think if you just look at the cycling community, cycling is transport, not as sport. It's still very, very early right across the board. And I think cargo bikes is probably even earlier. And I think if you follow the infrastructure and the regulation, it's probably trending towards one way. But I think it is a longer term play. I don't think it's something that it's like you're going to be investing now for something that probably pays dividends in 3 years and 5 years. It's not going to be something that's like, going to be immediately obvious from day one. I mean, a lot of what we do at SpokeSafe is building the infrastructure now that is going to be fit for purpose in 3 years' time, and building that network out so that when all of those things fall into place, it's there. But that's what nascent markets are about. They're about putting some money down and putting a lot of sweat and effort into making things work for the future that you believe are going to be an improvement on what's existing. I mean, that's effectively the name of the game. So, yeah, I think we're early. A lot of work to go. I think the form factor of the bikes changing is a really good point. I mean, from what I can see, there's still already a load of different sort of shapes and sizes of cargo bikes that are there, and every other week I see like a new one pops out, and it looks a little bit more like a spaceship than the last one. So it'd be interesting to see how that changes.
And Charlie, you're also joining us on the 21st of March, as I mentioned, in our London networking, where you will do a short presentations around some of the things that we just spoke about. But can you just give us also a bit more information on why people should come and what you're going to tell them?
Sure. Yeah, I'll be kind of detailing a bit more about setting up and running cargo bike logistics operations, the kind of full end-to-end from sourcing a bike, maintenance, insurance, storage, financing, all of those pieces that are joined together to enable you to set up cargo bike logistics operations, and then also some kind of like useful insights into key cargo bike brands and operators and key trends in the market. Kind of coming back to what you asked earlier, the industry is advancing very quickly, and there's the products in the market today are getting more and more impressive. Some of the European brands landing in the UK, so in larger volumes, and again higher quality, larger low capacity products. So yeah, I think it's a very interesting space to be trying cargo bikes.
Well, thank you very much both. You will be able to see Charlie on the 21st of March on Tuesday in person in London, and to talk about cargo bikes and more warehousing. Max, Charlie, thank you very much. We will be continuing.